Hi, I'm Kimberley Rankin, and I'm going to share a glimpse into what shaped me. I find it really hard to talk about identity when there have been so many missing pieces in my life, when there has never been words or vocabulary as a child to explore my experience. When I was 3 years old, I found out I was adopted. My parents framed it in, "Your mother loved you so much that she gave you away." That they wanted a child so much. They wanted a baby daughter, that I was special, that I was chosen, and that they loved me very much, and I was theirs. There was no recognition for the fact that I had bonded with my mother in utero for 9 months, that from 18 weeks gestation, I could hear her heartbeat, hear her voice, feel her movement, and was taking on her emotions. There was no recognition for the fact that I lost my mother the day I was born. My parents believed that I was a blank slate, that they picked me up from the hospital at 6 weeks of age and changed my name, reissued my birth certificate, and I was now part of their family. There was no recognition for what I'd lost. It was 1973 when I was born, and there was no recognition of the fact that there was any psychological or emotional trauma in separating babies from their mothers. The societal narrative surrounding adoption only focused on what was gained by the adoptive family, gained by the baby, creating a sense of loyalty and obligation and gratitude. There was no space to explore what was missing, no room for that. As a child, I deeply yearned and longed for my mother, but I knew that in talking about this, it upset my adoptive mother. And I already carried the fear of rejection and knew how much my words were upsetting her. So I stopped talking about it and I buried these feelings. And to ensure that I was not rejected or abandoned again, I adapted to the role of their daughter. I became a people pleaser. I morphed and became a chameleon, fitting into different situations to ensure I wasn't rejected and to ensure that I belonged. I could tell by going into my friends' houses as a child that I was different, that there was a lack of attunement in my home. I could see how naturally things flowed with my friends and their siblings and their parents. And I knew that was missing. And I longed to have that closeness. Never truly felt that I belonged in the family that I grew up in, or that I ever felt I was where I never felt I was where I really wanted to be. My parents gave me everything, love and all the material needs I could have ever wanted, but it was never enough. I never had that attunement. I feel like my entire life I've chosen attachment over authenticity. I've adapted and morphed into who I thought people wanted me to be, so that I could belong, so that I could truly feel like I fitted in. Yet I feel like it's been a lifelong search to belong and to know who I truly am. In 2018, my hairdresser sent me a copy of The Primal Wound. She'd been telling me for a number of months that I really needed to read it and understand the concept, that the experiences that I had shared with her, she said, would be highlighted in the book. It took me a long time to open the book, but when I did, it was the first time I had really felt seen and validated. Every page I turned resonated with my own experience, which I had internalized. I'd never been given words or the permission to explore my experience previously. As a child, whilst I had spoken about my adoption with my parents, they had never actually gone into the psychology or the emotional impacts which had been left behind from the separation of myself and my biological mother. It was in reading the book, the section that really struck me was the one on night terrors, where Nancy Verrier explains that because adoptees internalise their trauma from the separation, that without words, a subconscious memory still shines through. For me, it did in night terrors. When I was about 8, I started experiencing these night terrors, and they were framed to me by my parents, which I had believed up until this point, that I would wake in the middle of the night and not know where I was. I wouldn't recognise them. They'd be sitting in my bedroom and I would look beyond them and not be comforted and keep screaming. It wasn't until I read the words in her book that I realised what these night terrors were, because I could remember waking and screaming, I want my mummy, I want my real mummy, I want to go home. My parents sent me for a brain scan. They thought I had a brain tumour. My trauma continued to go unrecognised until I read these words and I started to understand how deeply the separation had impacted me in every aspect of my life. But when I think back to that 8-year-old and what was going on at that time for me in my life, I can understand why the night terrors started. Earlier that year, on my special day, which was the celebration of the day I was adopted into my adoptive family, one of the neighbours said to me, "You know you're only being celebrated because you weren't wanted." I took that on board. Later in that year, the teacher, while studying families, asked the children in the room to put their hand up if they were adopted. So I did. That led to teasing in the playground. "You know you weren't wanted." It was the first time I started to understand what adoption actually meant. To me, I made sense of it. That if I was so wanted and chosen by my adoptive family, that first I had to be unwanted by someone else. The feelings of abandonment and rejection all surfaced. And then also the birth of my neighbour's son. We went to visit him in the hospital when he was a couple of hours old. It was the first time I'd ever been in a hospital nursery. And I remember looking through the window at the rows of babies lined up. And it made sense of the story that my mother had told me, that she'd come to the hospital and chosen me, that she had wanted a little girl and walked the rows of babies and picked me out. There's no wonder the night terrors started. And it wasn't till years later in reunion that I also worked out that my brother was born that same year. So the connection to my mother, that primal connection, I'm sure it was felt. The primal wound and its concept in psychology, describing the deep, invisible trauma experienced when a baby is separated from their biological mother, is real. And it's gone unnoticed and unrecognised for far too long. Back when I was growing up, this trauma wasn't recognised. There were no words surrounding my experience. There was no recognition, and I carried my feelings deep inside through every stage of my life. It's impacted my relationships, my self-worth, my beliefs, and it's all been kept deeply hidden and buried inside because it wasn't recognised. Adoption doesn't begin with joy. It begins with loss. And before I was given a new home, a new name, a new family, I suffered a profound loss, the loss of my mother and my biological family. This loss was never recognised. Because I was considered to be a blank slate, because it was pre-verbal, this trauma was never recognised. And it is something that I have carried with me my entire life. My first experience in the world was bonding with my mother in utero, and then losing her on the day I was born. If my mother had died in childbirth, this loss would have been recognised. It would have been understood. It would have been talked about. Because I was adopted, it was never recognised. It was never spoken about. The first 6 weeks of my life that I spent in a hospital nursery, never discussed. And its impacts remained unrecognised. As a child, I carried this grief and loss internally. I never spoke about it because if I did, it upset my mother. On Mother's Day, she grieved her own mother's loss, the death of her mother. Yet, she never recognised that I too was grieving mine. On my birthdays, I was never happy. I was always told, you always want more. You're never going to be happy. And it was true. Something was always missing. And then as a teenager, I so desperately needed my mother. The loss was so present in my life. I would sit on buses, looking out windows, wondering if she was on the bus. I needed her. The loss turned into anger. Why wasn't she there? Why wasn't she there for me? I really did need her then. Reunion highlights what's been lost. Lost family, lost connections, lost time and memories. And it brings to the surface grief. By looking at what's been gained in adoption and not recognising what's been lost, and the presence of the pre-verbal trauma that's caused by separation, we're doing adoptees a disservice. It's time for this disenfranchised grief to be recognised. My entire life, I had wondered who my mother was, and I had wanted to know who she was. And when her letter arrived when I was 22, I was so overjoyed. I was just in awe to find out that I had 3 brothers, that she had found me. And I was so excited to respond, but a part of me held back. The part that had been conditioned, the one out of gratitude and loyalty to my parents. The words of the people around me hung over my head. Why do you need to know? She didn't want you. You've already had a great life. You've got parents who love you. Why do you need more? I was just about to go travelling for 9 weeks when the letter arrived, and I wrote my draft and I decided I'd send it when I got back. When I travelled with my girlfriend through Europe, she said that I told her every day how excited I was and how she would say to me, "How can you do this to your parents? You've had such a good life." So I came home and I didn't respond for 5 years. I'd written many drafts over that time, but I just couldn't send them. It was that gratitude and loyalty that I owed my parents. And then I was pregnant with my daughter, and going through the pregnancy and feeling her move and bond and holding her for the first time and looking into her eyes and thinking, this is the first biological relative I've ever met. You are the first person I have ever looked like. There's something so wrong about the first biological relative you meet being a child. So I sat down with my parents and I explained to them my need to finally respond to this letter. And whilst they said they understood, they put some rules in place. One of them being the people I could tell. They didn't want me telling certain family members. They were very private people. They didn't want their business exposed to be the town gossip. My father said to me, "Do what you need to do, but we won't ever speak about this again." And we didn't. 19 years later, he passed away and we never spoke about it. I was so excited to finally write the letter, although a little hesitant. I posted my letter, and within days, I received a response. And I can remember at the time feeling so overwhelmed how quickly that response had arrived. We wrote back and forth, exchanged photos, sent some faxes, and then finally had a phone conversation. It's also nerve-wracking. I still had feelings of not being good enough and wanting to be the best I could be so that I wasn't rejected again. When we finally met, it felt so overwhelming. I was so nervous. I can remember meeting and then going to a cafe for lunch. There were so many questions, so much to talk about. How do you cover 27 years in a 3-hour lunch? There was just so much to talk about. And I can remember just pushing my food around the plate. The nerves were so great. At the time, Karen was living in another state, which allowed us to explore connection without it being part of everyday life. I was able to meet my brothers and her extended family, but I was also the mother of 2 young children at that time. About 2 years into reunion, she told me that she was moving back to Sydney, and she located herself geographically halfway between where I lived and where my adoptive parents lived. I found this really confronting and overwhelming, and I pulled back. I stopped connection and communication. I felt that the pressure of my parents' wishes and the loyalty and obligation that I felt to them, this was all part of that decision at the time, along with me focusing on raising my children. We didn't speak for a number of years, and then we started eventually catching up every 6 months or so for dinner. But how do you get to know someone over a 3-hour dinner? Essentially, we were strangers who were bonded, but also held the wounds of separation. We really struggled to connect deeply. I was telling her what I thought she wanted to hear. She was saying to me that she'd made the right decision, that I'd had a good life, and I was feeding into that. When really, I wanted to hear that she'd wanted me, that she'd needed me, that she'd missed me. It was a catch-22. Neither of us were saying what we truly felt. And then she started asking to see my kids, which I really pushed back on because I felt like I didn't feel comfortable. So how could I bring my kids into the equation? And that's really sad because she could have been part of their life and they could have had a relationship. So many missed opportunities for relationship and relationships, and such a waste of time. My brother passed away, and I hold deep regret and guilt over the fact that we didn't really know each other. We didn't have a relationship. And then there were a number of events that started to turn our relationship around. In 2017, Karen told me that she was sorry. It was something I'd been waiting so long to hear, something that I had wanted to hear. She told me that she had wanted me and had missed seeing me grow up. This enabled me to drop some walls and boundaries, yet we still struggled. We both started doing some personal work to heal ourselves before we could come together. It was in 2018 that I read The Primal Wound, and turning every page, it was the first time I had felt truly seen. Everything that I had internalized, all those feelings and thoughts, I just thought it was me that had felt like this. And once I'd finished, I relayed the experience to Karen of how I'd felt reading the book and what it had awoken in me. And she too read the book. The strange thing is that in 2019, when she moved back to Queensland, that's when our relationship started to deepen. I had felt that I could never truly get close to her when she was in Sydney, because what if she left? And now she had left. She'd moved back interstate and she wasn't just around the corner anymore. And it was almost like I gave myself permission to drop some more walls. We came together and decided that we would stop hurting each other and start actually listening and creating a true mother-daughter bond, one where we deeply listened and heard each other. It was through this mutual desire that we were able to build trust, which allowed for honesty and vulnerability to come in for us to truly see each other and hear each other. Like any relationship, it's still a work in progress. We do have our ups and downs, but they're nowhere near like what we experienced in the first 17 years of our reunion. What's really sad is that I prioritised everyone else's needs above my own. That I allowed the fear of losing everything I'd ever known and the obligation of loyalty to outweigh my own needs. It was also the fear of speaking my truth and being vulnerable and open and honest and holding back because I was so scared of being rejected by the one person who I just wanted to love me. I'm so grateful that my mother never gave up on us and that we have been able to co-create a true mother-daughter relationship, one that I have always wanted and hold so deeply in my heart. Over the past couple of years, as I've been working on understanding myself, I'm now aware that every relationship throughout every stage of my life has been affected by adoption, by the way I show up, by the wounds I hold. They all come through. In the way I adapt like a chameleon to the groups of people that I'm with. I'll sit back and observe what's going on in a group and how I can show up as not too much, as not too little, just to be right, just to fly under the radar. That way I can avoid being rejected or abandoned. And this goes through every stage of my life. I know that I've been impacted by the words that were spoken to me as a child, that the way adoption was framed to me, that my mother loved me so much that she gave me away, has affected my perception of love and permanency. And if my own mother wasn't there for me, how will anyone else ever be? That my self-worth and the belief that I'm not good enough affects how I show up. That I'll choose attachment over authenticity any day. As a child, attunement was missing in my adoptive family. I would often hear, why can't you be more like? This reinforced the feeling that I wasn't enough. That who I was naturally was never going to be enough for my adoptive parents. I started people pleasing at a very young age, putting other people's needs and wants before my own. I internalized my feelings and my thoughts because I didn't want to upset people. I didn't want to be rejected or abandoned. That if I did what they wanted, they'd keep me around. When I entered reunion, I felt like I was being forced to make a choice, to choose and prioritise my adoptive family out of loyalty and obligation. And I shut down my true feelings and thoughts once more. Because I wasn't speaking up for me, I felt like I was living a double life for so long. But in the last couple of years, in looking at the impacts and how it's been a lifelong journey, I recognise that it's time for me to speak up and be authentic, to show up as the real me, to put myself first and what I want. Because for so long, I've shut it down. But now I know the path forward for me is to be authentic and to speak up for what I truly want and need. I learnt to people please at a very young age, to put other people's wants and needs above my own. I took on their beliefs. I took on what they told me. I internalized how I was really feeling because I wanted to ensure that I wasn't going to be rejected or abandoned again. But in looking at the impacts, the lifelong impacts of adoption over the last couple of years, I've come to see that I need to put myself first and my own needs first, that I need to show up and be the authentic me, that being honest and vulnerable and speaking about my experience and the fact that it does actually begin with loss shouldn't be too much. When I was pregnant with my first child, I could feel her move inside me. I could feel myself bonding with her. And when she was born and I held her in my arms for the first time, I looked at her and I could see myself reflected for the first time in my life. She was the spitting image of my baby photos. I had never looked like anyone before. There's something so wrong about the first biological person that you meet being your own child. As I held her as she grew, I wondered how anyone could give away their baby. I needed to know more about me, about where I'd come from, and the circumstances surrounding my adoption. I'd received the letter 5 years before from my mother, and I had never felt like it was the right time. I'd never felt good enough, that I'd done enough. I had taken on the beliefs of all the people around me that I owed it to my parents for everything they had given me, that loyalty, that how could I do this to them? But it was never about them. It was always about me. It should have always been about me. Everyone has a right to know their biological family. and I wish that I had known and taken on that belief then. So having my daughter gave me permission to respond to that letter. I felt like it was an excuse to finally send the final draft and put it in the mail. So not only was I navigating motherhood, I also embarked on our reunion journey. I found it really difficult. I found it really hard. It brought up a lot of emotions that parenting my children brought up so much of what I'd lost, what I had missed out on, that I knew the bond that I had with them that I hadn't experienced myself as a child with my mother. I knew that was missing. But I didn't tell anyone. I kept it all internalized. I didn't know I was allowed to feel that way. So as they grew, that loyalty to my adoptive parents continued. When Karen and I would meet up, it was bringing up feelings inside me that I'd never been allowed to explore, that I'd never been given words or vocab when I was a child. I didn't know I was allowed to feel them, and I shut them down. I compartmentalized these feelings in order for me to show up and be the best mother that I could be for my children. I also shut down connection between Karen and my children out of a loyalty, a displaced loyalty that I felt to my parents. And because of this, not only have my children missed out, and Karen and my brothers, I've missed out. I missed the opportunity on bringing my biological family and my adoptive family together to create a sense of belonging, not only for myself, but my children. And now, as they're young adults, it's difficult to navigate. They are missing the layers of family. It's generational. It's not just a one-time event, it's a lifetime. I've spent a fair bit of time thinking about family and belonging, and I feel in order to do this topic justice, I will read my reflective thoughts. It is difficult feeling like you are being pulled between silence and seeking answers to questions. I used to think about asking about my biological family meant I was not being grateful, that I owed my adoptive family my loyalty out of obligation for them raising me. Now I know curiosity is not disloyalty. It's a human need to know ourselves. Belonging isn't about feeling like you must choose. It's about being allowed to be whole. Growing up as an adoptee means learning to exist between two worlds. One you were born into but taken from, and one you were placed into without a choice, but expected to fully embrace. Even in the most loving of adoptive families, there can be an unshakable feeling of disconnection or otherness. The reality of adoption is far more complex than the fairy tale suggests. It means navigating identity confusion and constantly questioning if you belong. It often comes with emotional suppression as the unspoken pressure to be grateful, silences the very real feelings of loss and displacement. There is the fear of rejection, a lingering thought. If I was given away once, will I be abandoned again? The absence of genetic mirroring can leave adoptees feeling unanchored, with no one who looks like them, moves like them, thinks like them, or shares their unique talents and traits. Then there are the lifelong unanswered questions, the gaps in our history that no one can fill or answer. Adoption is not just about living with a new name and family. It is about loss. It is about the quiet, often internalized and unseen thoughts that play out silently. There is nothing normal about my situation, about being separated from my mother at birth and placed into another family. There is nothing normal about reconnecting with her decades later and being made to feel by others that wanting closeness is somehow strange. This is the narrative so many adoptees hear, the one of gratitude. Be thankful. You should be grateful for what you have. Do not dwell on what was lost. You were chosen. You were loved. Why is that not enough? But gratitude and grief can coexist, and wanting more, truth, connection, and a sense of belonging does not make me ungrateful. Even in reunion, I feel the gaps in connection, of circling on the peripheral, of not really being on the inner circle. When the feeling of being an imposter arises, and questioning if I am really entitled to want to belong, to ask for more time, or to share in experiences. Am I viewed as part of the family? Do I have any right to want to be? It is difficult building connections and memories when you don't truly feel like you belong anywhere. Thanks for listening. The wounded inner child. Most of us have one. They're the parts of us that were unseen, shamed, silenced, who were never given what they truly deserved or wanted or required. I find it difficult to comfort mine, understand why she's so sad, so angry, so unseen. I'm listening to her. I'm trying to understand her. When she comes out, I seek to understand what's truly going on. She's all the parts of me. The 8-year-old who screamed in her night terrors, I want my mummy. I want my real mummy. I want to go home. She's the 16-year-old who screamed at her adoptive mother, just find my mother. I need to know who she is. I need her. She's the 30-year-old who sat in front of her mother and said, why can't you hear me? Why can't you truly hear what I am saying to you? I need you to listen to me. She's the 50-year-old who is still confused, still unpacking this lifelong journey. She's every part of me that I've ever been. I still find it difficult to comfort her. I'm learning. I'm trying to understand. Because she truly deserves to be comforted, heard, and seen. When Karen and I embarked on our reunion journey, we navigated it separately, without any guidance or adoption-aware support. This created challenges far beyond our first meeting. We met as two strangers who shared a primal bond and carried the wounds of our separation. The years have been filled with misunderstandings, hurt, many tears, and a lot of pain. During the early years of reunion, I was trying to make sense of my thoughts and feelings and beliefs. I kept telling myself and everyone else that I was fine. However, deep down, I knew I wasn't. I was searching for something concrete that would explain my experience, but the resources weren't there. In 2019, we made a conscious and intentional choice to stop hurting each other, to come together and start listening to each other, to truly hear. It was that shift which changed everything for us. And slowly and intentionally, we began to build the mother-daughter bond that we share today. The past 5 years of our relationship have been deeply meaningful. They've been grounded in openness, compassion, clarification, and a mutual understanding. Like any relationship, it's a work in progress. But it's rooted in love, truth, and a shared intention. Our journey would have looked very different had we understood how relinquishment and separation had shaped my identity, how I navigated relationships, and my self-worth. It was this realization that became the foundation for our research and the resources of the emotional fingerprint of an adoptee. My mission today is to shine a light on the adoptee experience because it's been left unspoken for far too long. Through the emotional fingerprint of an adoptee, we offer a pathway to understanding, connection, and healing so that others can walk an easier pathway than we've walked.